Welcome to the Kindness and Compassion podcast, where we will explore the intersection of psychology, science, and spirituality. My name is Gordon Brewer, and I'm a licensed psychotherapist and mental health provider. I have spent my career helping people learn how to better manage their emotions and find more meaning in their lives and connection in their relationships. Join me as we think and talk about the ways we can find happiness and be content in our lives through the practices of kindness and compassion. We will talk with other experts in the fields of psychology, science, and religion. I'm so glad you're with me on this journey as we learn how to be at peace with ourselves and others. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kindness and Compassion podcast. And this is episode number 24. And I'm Gordon Brewer, and glad you've joined me. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. And if you're coming back for more, glad you're back. And for those of you coming back, a little bit of an apology here to some degree, because I've the podcast kind of faded a little bit. There's this thing called pod fading, where just you get into a rut where you're not really getting episodes out. And I had some things just going on in my life to where I needed to put this on the back burner again. Just some health issues for me, but also just the ongoing issues I'm having with my wife and her health. And there's more to come on that. I'm planning an episode just around caregiving and what it means to be a caregiver. And look, I don't want to say I'm looking forward to that, but I think it's an important topic to share, because I know there's a lot of folks like me out there that are in this caregiving role. And how do we manage all that emotionally and psychologically and spiritually and all of that sort of thing? But nonetheless, I'm glad you're here and looking forward to you hearing my interview with Blake Roberts. And Blake is a fellow therapist. He's based in the Nashville, Tennessee area, and Blake is also a marriage and family therapist like I am, and we have a great conversation just around what it means to approach life with more curiosity, particularly in looking at ourselves and our own things that are going on for us internally. As Blake and I talk about, a lot of us that are in kind of the mental health world that are therapists and that sort of thing, we come into it really kind of being curious about our own stuff and the things that we're struggling with internally. And just like every other human being, we have times in our lives when we're going through those things. But anyway, looking forward to you hearing my conversation with Blake, and just, again, how we can live into being more curious about things rather than critical, and particularly in how we approach ourselves and the stories we tell ourselves. So looking forward to you hearing my conversation with Blake. One of the things I wanted to invite you to do, though, is go over to our website. I've finally got it pulled together, and it will be there for you. A guide that I put together, and a shout out to my good friend James Marlin, who kind of assisted me with this. But it's a guide to help you learn how to live into more kindness and compassion in your life. And it's a free PDF that you can download. And it's just my gift to you for following the podcast and being part of me in this journey. And so really hoping over this next year to do more with this particular podcast. Again, apologize. I've been kind of on and off with it over the last couple of years, and just a lot of stuff going on in my life that's caused that to happen. But anyway, love for you to check out the free Kindness and Compassion guide that I've put together with my friend James Marlin. So you can go over to kindnessandcompassion.com. Just there'll be a pop-up that'll come up for you, and you can sign up for that and get and you'll get put on an email list, and you can decline that or join in. Either way is fine, but I'm glad you're with me on this journey. So anyway, Thanks again for joining me. And here's my conversation with Blake Roberts. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome again to the podcast. And I'm happy for you to get to know today Blake Roberts. And Blake is a fellow therapist in the Nashville, Tennessee area. Welcome, Blake.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Yes. And so, Blake, as I start with most everyone, tell folks a little bit more about yourself and how you've landed where you've landed.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a not a straight and forward path to being a therapist, but kind of the practical part of it is I went to undergrad for major Christian ministries and was expecting to go into the church world and work through that. And for a number of reasons that we won't get into on this podcast, it just ended up not working out and not being what I thought it was, just due to some settings that I was in. And ended up after that, I went to college to play football. And so very heavy sports background growing up, which ties a lot into what we'll probably end up talking about of, just certain ideas of being masculine and being man or being a man and hiding emotions and getting thicker skin and all of those. There are so many wonderful things about team sports. And then there are also other things that are kind of the subconscious messages that you pick up on, or that I certainly picked up on.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just, based off the context of my story growing up, that played a part in that too. And then after college, started working at a local art gallery for my father-in-law, actually, and managed that for a few years, and really just started. I didn't get into my own personal therapy until I was in my early to mid 20s, maybe. I had been encouraged by it from my parents at an early age, and I just didn't. I think then I would have said I didn't see the need for it, but under the surface, which I didn't have language for then, I was really just scared to do it, and had a lot of stuff that I did not know how to name or didn't have language around, let alone know how to work through, let alone want to talk to a stranger and be vulnerable about it. And so when I finally, some things in life happened that got me to the point of being ready and acknowledging that I had problems just within myself that then impacted my relationship with my wife, and got into counseling, went to a sort of intensive recovery program, and just started peeling back the layers of my story and really engaging the depths of my wounds and desires. And out of that, years later, I started to put language around what if I was on the other side of the chair. And because of my shame of who would I be, who am I to be able to do that, it took probably even 6 months of that thought stirring in my mind before I even shared it with my wife. And thankfully I had enough people that knew me really well at this point. And when I started bringing it to them, they encouraged it and affirmed it. And so then I went back to school, and now I have a private practice, and it's one of those things that who knows what it'll look like in years to come. But it's one of the first things that I've done that I have a real sense of this is exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And that feels really good, and came out of a lot of just my own personal work.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a pretty typical story for those of us in the kind of the mental health field, is that we get interested in our own, I'm using air quotes, issues.
Sure.
And then when we work through that, we really have this desire to want to help others with the same kinds of things, because I think we all struggle with different things in different ways along in life, and it's under the surface. And yeah. And so it's interesting because, as we were talking about before we started recording, Blake and I kind of work with similar populations, with working with men that are struggling with just all of the internal kinds of stuff. And so, yeah, so you want to say more Blake, about kind of your work as a therapist and just kind of the things that you have learned over the years about how we can better live into kindness and compassion, not only within ourselves, but with others?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd love to. The thing that first comes up when you ask that question initially, I think we really have to learn, not just in a conceptual kind of way, but in an embodied experiential kind of way, how to be kind and compassionate to ourselves. And then out of that flows a real kindness and compassion, I think, towards other people. And not that you can't have that. My story is I don't know if you're familiar or your listeners, I kind of take what you want of this and leave the rest kind of tool. But the Enneagram says that I'm a 9, which essentially just means, to me, it means I can be whoever I need to be in whatever setting with whatever person. And so I would like to think in some ways kind and compassionate towards others, and not really towards myself. The inner dialogue that I had was quite the opposite of that. It was critical. It was shame. It was, I'm a piece of fill in the blank, whatever word that you would use, and stuck in behaviors that reinforced those messages, and trying all the things to stop those behaviors because maybe that will change the messages. And interestingly, in my faith tradition as a Christian, like, I grew up in a very, I'm using air quotes now, kind and compassionate framework of God and how God views us. And I believe that. And yet there was a lot of areas of my life where that did not translate internally. And then that leads to all sorts of messages and things. So I think once I really started to get in circles where people were extending kindness and compassion towards me, specifically towards the parts of me that I despised and were ashamed of and hated even, and not just extended the compassion, but really like got in the trenches with me and helped me put language to some of these things and help me understand where these where these narratives were coming from, and even some of the wounds within my, the younger parts of my story, how they were connected. It really started to move from this conceptual idea to this experiential, I can do that for myself, and I can allow God to do that in a different way. And so that's kind of the framework, so to speak, that I use a lot with clients, with the men that come in, and they come in for all sorts of different reasons. Some are aware of maybe some messy childhood dynamics that they want to work through. Some aren't. Some have just relational issues or career stress, or they just know something's missing. And as a marriage and family therapist, I'm trained and view a lot of things systemically, and for me specifically, the family system and how impacted we are by that, and directly and indirectly, and a lot of times indirectly. And so a lot of the work that I end up doing with men is connecting dots between what's going wrong now, and not just what's going wrong, but the narratives around why these things are going wrong. I don't know if you heard my dog, but it's storming here. So she does not like thunder. Connecting the dots to stories of harm and wounding, and being able to really get curious about those stories and be with them in a very kind, compassionate, curious way, which is a very tender ground, so to speak, place to be able to experience some of that change and gain new narratives, not just continuing to, kind of white knuckle it, so to speak, or just push through trying to change some of these things.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting with I was listening to another podcast this morning. It's a friend of mine, friends of mine,
Mhm.
uh, Aaron Potratz and Nathan Hawkins, and they were talking about the Enneagram and the the let's see, the 8, 9, and 1 are in the head triad, and so
Mhm.
folks with that particular personality type or pension
Mhm.
can tend to get stuck in their heads, and then like you mentioned, that whole narrative, the story, as Brene Brown likes to say, the story we tell ourselves can really get kind of convoluted in many ways.
Mhm.
And I love what you're saying about approaching things with curiosity, because that, to me, that's the key to changing that whole dynamic, not only in relationships, but also in looking at ourselves. I think being able to get curious about, okay, I'm feeling or thinking this particular way. Okay,
Mhm.
what's behind that? What's bringing that up for me? And then just in relationships, we can tend to get critical of others or also defensive with others. And I think a starting place in changing those dynamics is to get curious. Okay,
Mhm.
so this person seems angry with me. So let me understand that rather than just automatically going on the defensive.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And you mentioned those three numbers being in the head triad and being
Uh-huh.
more in their head than I think the gut, and maybe there's one other
Mm-hmm.
one.
Uh-huh.
And for me, that being in my head trying to understand things was it was just safer.
Mm-hmm.
There was so much that we don't have time to get into on this
Yeah.
podcast within my
Uh-huh.
family dynamic and being the oldest and stuff going on with my parents and stuff just with me that maybe they didn't even know about. So much emotion and fear and trauma really that was happening, and we know that all of those things happen in our body.
Mm-hmm.
Our,
Mm-hmm.
our experience, our emotions are stored in our body,
Mm-hmm.
and then our brain tries to make sense of those things with
Yeah.
the knowledge that it has about them. And we didn't talk a lot about feelings growing up, which is true for a lot of men.
Mm-hmm.
And so then you just kind of, as a little guy, perceive things based off of what you see and learn that some emotions are okay and some are not. Or within this family, some people are allowed to have emotions and some aren't.
Yeah.
And that just is confusing because as little people, we have no problem feeling. And
Mm-hmm.
along the way we start to learn that certain things are bad or not okay, and so we lock them away. And so for me to be, I'll use this language now, but like to be in my body then, so to be in my experience and my feelings and my emotions and desires and all those things was scary, lonely to some degree. And
Mm-hmm.
so I learned, parts of me learned ways to sort of self-correct, to protect myself. And then that just becomes, a neural pathway that just gets set in stone, and then you just keep doing that and keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, those parts of my brain don't really know the difference if I'm
Right.
28 and in a fight with my wife, or if I'm 4 and
Mm-hmm.
watching something between my parents. And so being able to learn and acknowledge, okay, yeah, I'm in my head a lot. That's one part of it.
Yeah.
And then why am I in my head right now? What is this? What am I protecting myself from? What am I afraid of will happen
Mm-hmm.
if I get out of my head and into my experience? And
Right.
to do that, I have to then come to face with why it was hard then.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think I've got to correct myself here, because I think I got that wrong, because when you were talking about the body,
Mm-hmm.
actually the 8, 9, and 1 are in the gut triad, not the head
Okay.
triad. So
Okay.
that makes sense, but it still applies. I mean, you're right. We experience stuff in our bodies,
Mm-hmm.
and that whole mind body connection is very real. And I think depending depending on a person's background or whatever, we can learn to, out of, in a way to survive, we learn to switch that off, and we just lose touch with it. And
Yeah.
you know, it's funny, you know, and just working as we both work with men, you ask a man what he's feeling. Well, it's usually, as I like to say, mad, glad, hungry, or horny. That's those are the basic feelings and the repertoire of feelings, of labels for their feelings, doesn't go much beyond that. And so having to really kind of learning, okay, what are those other feelings, that other things that maybe we're experiencing that we don't have the language for.
Yeah. Language is so important. You know, we use a term that you've probably heard or even said in our world: if you can name it, you can tame it. And
right.
If I don't have language around what I'm feeling, then it's hard to communicate it. Or one little sliver of it just comes out, which might be anger or resentment or frustration, and I really may be scared or lonely, and I need some connection. But those are so much more vulnerable to be in touch with, let alone to express with another person. It's much, I feel much more in control when I'm just in my anger or my rage. And so this idea of kindness and compassion, and I always say with my clients, like moving from a place of curiosity or from criticism to curiosity. And so these parts of myself that I don't like, maybe I lash out, or I'm doing things that I don't want to do. And there's this sort of inner dialogue that's just critical of that.
Right.
And it would be like, I sometimes use this example, if with my clients, if I'm like, if your whole family was in here, and let's say there's one family member, maybe your kid, that is kind of acting out and doing something that you don't like, and something that is negatively impacting the whole system. And I'll be like, if you are trying to learn about maybe why that kid is doing that thing, and you're angry at them and you're criticizing them for what they're doing in an attempt to learn and connect with them, how do you think that will go? And most of them are like, not very well. It's like, yeah, exactly. That person is probably not going to want to open up or feel safe to share that thing, because because of the way that it's being approached. And I think the same thing is true when we are working with ourselves and all of these different parts that we have. When I'm just critical of a part of me that I don't like, or maybe that is negatively impacting my life, I'm not going to learn a lot, because that part's either just going to get louder because it thinks it's just trying to help. It doesn't realize maybe the way that it's destructing. And so when we can move from a place of criticism to curiosity, compassion, when we can move to a place of curiosity towards those parts, we start to learn, okay, this part's afraid if it doesn't do this, if it doesn't show up in this way, then I might be hurt. It's like, okay. And then we start to engage that, start to connect dots. What feels familiar to that? Oh, well, when I was younger, this happened. And it's like, okay, that makes sense then, why that. So then there's this opportunity for compassion towards these parts of us that really did us a service and really helped at some point. And so then when they show up today and I can extend some of that compassion, then I can actually get it to relax, remind it things are different now. I don't need you to do this anymore, or I don't need to respond this way. And it just it's a totally different motivation. I think kindness and compassion and curiosity is a much greater motivation for change than shame and criticism, which is, I think, as this is a generalization that may not be fair, but as men, or even just me, again, going back to like the sports culture, even shame as a motivator, it works in a lot of ways. It gets me more playing time on the field. It gets me promotions because I realize that I'm not doing well and I need to do better. Yet it there's this lacking of something. And so really trying to move from those two things as a motivator, shame and criticism, to curiosity, kindness, compassion.
Right. Yeah. For some reason, and I think it's just in our culture. I think especially for men, anger is an acceptable emotion to some degree. I mean, if it's kind of that whole kind of warrior mentality, that sort of thing. And the way that I think about, if someone is truly angry, if they were to really look at that and peel back the layers, usually underneath that is hurt and fear. I mean, anger is a way to protect ourselves. That's why, when the caveman was backed into the corner by the saber-toothed tiger, in order to survive that situation, they either had to fight, run, or, flee or fight or freeze or whatever. And so a lot of that is just within our DNA, so to speak. And so what you're talking about is really teaching ourselves how to become more mindful of where that's coming from, of understanding where that's coming from, because as we both know, what you feel is what you feel, and you can't just necessarily switch on and off like a light switch, but you can become more aware of it. And it's kind of a phrase that's become kind of a mantra here lately, is in just my work with clients as well, as learn how to respond to things rather than to react to things.
Yep. Yeah. There was a neuroscientist that I heard once, I can't remember who it was, but the idea has stuck with me. But he was talking in a much more eloquent way than I can say. He was talking about how the brain doesn't know the difference between a bear and a deadline, and meaning like a deadline for work. So essentially the brain doesn't know the difference between threats. And so he just asked the simple question to himself, and he encourages people to do the same, of, I wish I could remember his name so I can give him credit, but when I notice myself reacting in a way that, let's say, doesn't fit the situation or doesn't match the situation, asking myself the question, is whatever I'm afraid of or whatever I perceive as happening, is this a threat to my life, or is this a threat to my lifestyle? And going off of what you just said, cavemen needed to react that way. They needed to, if there's a bear charging me, I need to react out of fear. I need to fight, whatever I need to do to keep myself safe.
Right.
If I'm in an argument with my wife, or if my kid does something that makes me really angry, that is threatening still. And to the brain and to the system, it feels like a similar threat. That doesn't mean that I need to react to the threat that same way. And so that question I've found, and even with my clients, is it's just helpful to kind of bring myself back to, okay, if this is just a threat to my lifestyle, meaning maybe I have to respond to something differently or engage emotions in a different way, yeah, that's hard and it's going to be difficult, but I can manage that, and I'm not going to die.
Right. Yeah. One of the ways I've heard that idea about what our brain does is, a lot of times, particularly that part of our brain that's there to help us survive, the amygdala, it can't distinguish between what is difficult versus what is dangerous. And you're exactly right. When we can learn to respond to things as difficult rather than dangerous, that's when we change things up. Unfortunately, that part of our brain doesn't necessarily respond to logic or language, but we can override it with the other parts of our brain. And so you might feel threatened, you might feel afraid, you might feel like you're in danger, but being able to think about it, okay, what's my choice? What are my choices here about how I want to respond?
Yeah, that's really helpful.
Yeah. Good.
Mm.
Well, Blake, I know that we could probably spend hours talking about these things, and
It feels like it's only been 5 minutes.
yeah, I know it. I know it. That's how it usually goes. So, but I'm so grateful to you for being on the podcast. Tell folks how they might want to, if they wanted to reach out to you, how they can get in touch and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So probably the easiest way is just my website, blakerobertscounseling.com, or I think blake.the.counselor on Instagram. And then also, I believe I sent you the link, but it's also on the bottom of my website. But I have a newsletter that I will occasionally send out prompts and just things to kind of practical things to engage our stories in kind of ways that we're talking. And also for any men that might be listening, if they sign up to that newsletter, they will be in the beginning phase of getting to hear something that another friend and I, who's a therapist, are working on, sort of a separate business that's really geared around all of what we're talking about, but specifically for men, which may look like groups and workshops and things like that. And so
awesome.
We're in the beginning stages of building that, but we want to bring people along to kind of see the progress and just get feedback of what's actually needed. So
awesome.
They can sign up that way, or just hello@blakeroberts.com is my email. If anybody wants to reach out directly.
Awesome. Yeah. And we'll have links here in the show notes and the show summary for people. Well, Blake, it's good to get to know you and get to meet another fellow Tennessean that's also a marriage and family therapist. So that's great.
So good to meet you. Glad we got to do this.
Yes. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
Well, again, a big thanks to Blake for joining me on the podcast, and be sure and check out his things. You can find him at blakerobertscounseling.com, and also you can find his Instagram at Blake the Counselor, and so be sure and check him out there. And again, big thanks to Blake for joining me, and I really enjoy these deep conversations just around these important issues, I think, and just learning how to better live into more kindness and compassion in our lives. And I think it does really start with curiosity and learning about, not only about ourselves, curious as to why we are like we are, and also why others are the way they are, and not be too quick to be critical of ourselves or others. And I think that's a key thing for us to learn. And also, I think by just learning our internal world better and understanding what makes ourselves tick, so to speak, it really is more empowering, and we don't have to be as afraid of things. So, So thanks, Blake, again for joining me. You'll find links here in the show notes for all of Blake's stuff. And thanks for joining me in this journey. Again, take time to follow us wherever you might be listening to the podcast, and visit us over at kindnessandcompassion.com. You can find the resources we mentioned there, and also be sure and sign up for that free Kindness and Compassion guide. It's a free PDF download, which is my gift to you. And again, thanks to James Marlin for collaborating with me on that. And hope to have you back. And if you would like to add to this conversation, and I'd love to maybe talk to you about being a guest on the podcast, you can find out about how to apply by going to kindnessandcompassion.com and click on the Contact Us link there, and you'll see an application to possibly join the podcast as a guest. So I invite you to that. So take care, folks. We'll be back here with you for future episodes, I promise. And I'm working hard to get a little more regular with the episodes. Thank you for your patience with that. And we'll talk to you here again soon. You have been listening to the Kindness and Compassion Podcast with Gordon Brewer, part of the Sightcraft network of podcasts. Please visit us at kindnessandcompassion.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in your journey. Be sure to follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to sign up to get the free Kindness and Compassion Practices Guide. Again, you can find that at kindnessandcompassion.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering clinical, medical, mental health, or legal advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.